Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I am assured that we have not met so far this year, so I am still in order by saying Happy New Year to everyone. Call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Wednesday, January 18th. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district and today are located on the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwépemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. You have before you the minutes of the December 16th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. I ask you to cast your mind back an entire year, and we have a recommendation regarding those minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Second, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none on the question, all in favor? That is carried. We move on to item 4.1, draft 2023-2027 financial plan. We have a report from Chief Financial Officer Carla Fox. And before Chief Financial Officer speaks, I would like to hand it over to CAO Hildebrand to say a few words. Also, just like to remind everyone that we only have a set period of time for this meeting. Want to make sure that everyone is heard. Staff are willing to meet one-on-one with directors. So if you have very detailed or unique questions regarding your electoral area or your municipality, then please feel free to reach out to staff and schedule a meeting. So CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Good afternoon, Board of Directors, and Happy New Year as well. Before we get started, I wanted to do just a few introductions of the staff that are joining us here today. You've maybe had a chance to meet some of them, but maybe not all of them. So I'd like to maybe start with that if I could. And firstly, I'd like to start with a special guest. We've got Mr. Scott Reed is here. Scott is the retired CFO from the Caribou Regional District that is actually helping Carla specifically and all of us kind of wade through a regional district budget, because that's something that Carla hasn't experienced before. So welcome to Scott and thank you. Scott will be kind of presenting as part of the presentation as well today. As far as other staff that are joining us as well, we've got Amanda's here. I think the board has met Amanda before. Adriana from operations, Judy Moore, Agnes, Kevin Skrapnik in the back, Randy Castle from our IT department, Terry, our film commissioner, Regina by herself. I think she'll be okay. And of course, Olivia's here and the rest of us here to answer any of your questions today. So welcome to all of them. And prior to Ms. Fox taking over and presenting our draft 2023 TNRD budget, I just wanted to acknowledge the time and effort that has gone into this draft by the entire team, right from staff rolling it all the way up. So thank you to their contributions and their knowledge. We really appreciate that you're here to listen to the presentation and to hear from the board and take questions potentially from the board as well. So Ms. Fox specifically has spent a significant amount of time getting us up to this point as we reviewed, discussed, and are now ready to present our draft budget. Like I've said before, there's many of you that are experiencing your own municipality some of the challenges we're having with budget this year. Cost of goods, cost of labor, past practices, utilities, inflationary impacts are kind of touching all of our services across the regional district. We've done our best to get to this point. We'll gladly hear your feedback and take your direction on where the budget ultimately will end up. So I'd like to pass it over to Carla now to kind of start the presentation, and I'll let her kind of decide how you want to take questions along the way and what the best process is. So take it away, Carla.
Thank you and good afternoon. Although it seems like months to me that just went by since I talked to you last. I know it's only been about a month. We really have worked hard here as a team to bring you a strong balanced budget. I will talk about a number of challenges and differences and changes as I go through the presentation. This team has really focused on how to offset the increases with internal reductions and finding those areas. So that has been something that we have done. You will see a move of IT services out of the library into admin. So admin at first glance strikingly looks very impactful as an increase. Please remember 1.38 million of that is moving IT services out of the library and into general government services, which overall on the tax requisition, you'd see library go down and admin go up, but the same service areas get charged for those services. So it just moves from one place to another. I'll lead you through the afternoon budget workshop with the intent to understand the required budget changes, cost changes, the service changes, and then the tax requisition requirements to support those changes. We will take you through a session on understanding the tax impact of the change, and that's a specific session at the end to really reflect on the number that's changed, but how that affects the tax requisition. And that's what Mr. Reed will be supporting me with at that time. My PowerPoint is not really bringing new information to the table, and where Mr. Reed is going to be speaking with you, we do have handouts for his section because that is information. And since 4:35 on Friday afternoon, that information was turned over to Scott to make sure all of my budget information was reflecting appropriately in his information, so he could bring you that piece of the presentation. So we really worked till the last minute to bring you the best numbers that we could. My intention isn't to train you how to create and do budgeting. I'm really here to provide you with enough information that you can interpret the data, understand the required changes, the impact of those changes. In addition, I hope that through this, it will instill confidence that the team that I'm working with have supported the required services, bringing you the best information, best numbers forward to the best of our abilities. It definitely takes a team, and that's my focus has been on collaboration and team, because I do not have the history and knowledge. So I have had to lean heavily on my team to bring me to where we are today. So again, we won't have all the answers. It's a huge document. We'll do our best. I do have and will tell you about the process that we'll have for questions and changes, and hopefully we can follow some sort of format to do that. I'm wondering if we could put up the PowerPoint presentation. All right, let's see if I know how to work this handy dandy thing. We'll look at that. All right. So in the report, and essentially I don't do this all the time. However, due to it being a new board at the table with returning members, but new members, I think it's always great to start with why we're here doing this. And that is, there is certain areas, service areas, municipalities out of the municipal area that require services, and they want those services to bring them a certain quality of life. Lots of those things have to do with infrastructure, water infrastructure, tourism, having cemeteries, arts and culture, all those different types of things. So that comes forward through our board, our representatives, and services are struck essentially. And when those services are struck, we have to come up with what do we need to bring those services to our constituents. That involves capital infrastructure, that involves resources, supplies. I think about recycling services and transportation and where we have to transport to and hauling costs. And we have to take all those things into consideration. And essentially, at the end of the day, that's what sets our level of service. So when I talk about we're bringing you your desired level of service, what I mean is based on our 2022 budget and actuals, that seemed to be at that time an acceptable level of service that we were delivering to the constituents. So we base our budget that we're coming up with 2023 numbers based on consistently delivering the same service, unless the board has given direction to add or change Monty Creek was a new fire service. You'll see that in the budget. So that's basically what we're doing. We're not trying to add anything new to the level of service unless it's come to us from the board. The board provides guidance through strategic planning, through setting the services, the bylaws, and the policies. So these all influence and guide the work that we do. The strategic planning session you guys do this year will really influence our planning for 2024. However, if there was immediate things and it required budget amendments, we'd bring those up. Or if we had those decisions before we set the final budget, those could be made at that time. The operating budget stays fairly consistent every year. The expected changes we've talked about right now are the negotiated wage increases, 10% insurance cost increase, the board supported new position of the director of my position as a chief financial officer. I'm like, what is that? The board supported new service of Monty Creek, anticipated inflationary cost increases, and that's from not a blanket 2 to 3% increase. We increase the expenditures on supplies and goods where we believe they're influenced by that in the plan from 24 to 27. But in 2023, we really try to accurately reflect the numbers that we require. And what you'll see across many of the service areas is where there's contracts, those contracts have increased significantly. So that's creating us a challenge. If we have little increases in those types of things, we can usually come up with an offset somewhere. But the larger increases in cost of goods are really what's creating the challenge for us in delivering the same service at the same price, because it's very little we can reduce. So the TNRD currently presents, and I mean currently, based on the past, I didn't recreate how we were presenting essentially the financial statements. There was too much work to do that, but capital and operating are totaled together. That is something that I'd like to shift and change, because you can only imagine capital costs really fluctuate up and down quite extremely, and your operating costs stay consistent. So what I'd like to show you is, here's your operating costs, gradually going up year over year. Here's your capital swinging around, and we pay for capital out of various ways, majority of grant funds. So having that embedded into our operating costs makes it a little bit more difficult for me to show you that consistency. The surpluses are starting to decline overall, and that's because every year we have a budget, we are bringing in surpluses to the next year's budget to offset the taxation required, but the surpluses are starting to become less because we're having to spend more of our operating expenditures. So that means there's less there to reduce the taxation. Inadvertently, we don't need operating costs to increase to make our taxes go up. All we have to have is surpluses go down and other revenues go down, and your taxes have to go up to make up for that other revenue. So that is one area, and reserves. And you'll see through the information I bring to you today, a bit of that story taking place and affecting the budget overall. All right. So this here is our agenda that I'm going to go through. There's a lot of information to get through. I'm going to try to take you through it the best that I can, making sure that heads don't start nodding off. It is a unique way to present, and I have tried to deliver on my commitment to present by service area. So the information that boards would have seen in the past is actually the same. I've just focused presenting in a different way. I've focused presenting on the service area rather than just the overall summary, which is the global budget of everything mixed together. I'll touch a bit on the departments, but really I'll take you through, here's area A, here's area B, here's the city of Kamloops. And there's positives and negatives to that. There's a lot there. But there's a lot of information to get through. But at any given time, I might only have the attention of 2 of you, which might make it a little bit tricky just as far as time to keep everybody engaged in the conversation. But what I can tell you is I'm really open to feedback at the end of this. And if you felt that this could have been represented in a different way, or you would have liked to see something, I certainly will try to incorporate the things that I can, that you would bring forward to me. I can take questions throughout the presentation. However, I do build in stops throughout the presentation to stop and ask for questions. If I can't answer, or if we can't as a team answer the question right there, I will note it down. One of the techniques I was going to try is through break, if there's some information that, because we have a lot of information at our fingertips, but I don't want you to have to wait through me for us to sift through information. So I'd take the break and the opportunity to find you some of those answers. When we return from the break, I'll try and answer a few of those questions and then get back to it. The questions that we cannot answer, obviously, I'll set them aside and either we'll meet with you individually or I will reply to you if it's something that pertains to all the board. I certainly will reply with an answer to all the board. So I just want to make sure I've covered everything for you here. So, and I think another unique thing here is I'm not sure that we've brought a presentation like this to this board in some time. There might be people that are eager to make motions and changes. I have been through this a number of times where I have some really eager ones that want to make motions right off the bat and make changes. But sometimes it's really beneficial to wade through the information, get the answers to many different areas. And some of those things that you want to change, you might get more information. There will be a time that you can. And once we get through the heavier section of the service areas and municipal portion of the presentation, which will be large, we will have a time then that might make sense. Or if you really want to understand the implication of the taxes, before you make any motions or give us direction for changes, there'll be a time at the end as well. And I'll try and keep us on target as far as the time we have today. That's just the second page of the agenda, and that's where Scott and I will be looking at the tax implications. Before I start getting into the information piece here, is there any questions at this time? All right, so the slides are really not a separate presentation. Essentially, they're here to guide you through the report that you've been given. So I have referred to page numbers of the report because some of the charts are big. You won't maybe be able to read a lot of the data. You might want to refer to the page in the report. It's up to you. There is 10 electoral areas, 11 municipal areas, and 10 specified areas. That's 31 specific groups of financials to get through. So I know many people want all the data and they want as much information as possible, but I cannot go line by line. I will give you general overview. I can guarantee we have looked at increases in some areas, decreases in other areas. Where we'll be giving you information on changes is those more impactful changes. They're more significant. We're not going $10,000 on supplies and it's went up here and there. That isn't my focus. However, you're more than welcome to ask us a question from maybe what you've come across. So I just want to make sure today we're bringing you the operating and capital expenditure increase of 3%, which is $2,299,071, and a global tax requisition increase of 5.68%, which is $1,331,000. I go right to the cent because why not? I can, but it's all based on a draft version and subject to change. So there is a difference, and this is important to point out right up front. The operating expenditures went up by 2.2 million. The tax requisition amount went up 1.3 million. And that's because of the work that we do with other revenues to offset the total amount of tax requisition. So it's you can't directly equate 2.2 million increase in operating expenditures and say that's what the taxes went up, because it's not equivalent to that. So you see that throughout. So I just want to point that out. It's an important distinction. And when you look at the departmental budget and the financial statements, we talk about operating increase. When I take you through the service area requisitions, we're talking specifically tax increase. So there'll be two different ways of looking at the information that are important to remember. So a little bit, we've talked about this. I'm not gonna go over this again, but it was the establishment of services, and the number of bylaws that we have is by service. We also have to have a capital bylaw for every capital reserve. That's the summary of the financial changes that I was just discussing with you. That is not information here, sorry. A lot of data. So on page 8 of the agenda, so it's important to note that the pages I'm referring to are the agenda pages. This is a chart that you'll see, and it just shows the breakout between the operating expenditures, the capital expenditures. We do have the MFA payments I've just shown in there to match the totals. And I've just tried to make sure that the totals were reflecting. You can easily tie back to the financial statements here. I imagine the larger focus of the discussion would be on the 6.5% increase in operating expenditures. The capital expenditures are going down slightly. Of course, it's not comparing apples to apples, and a large portion of those costs, I think 46% of the capital budget is carry forward capital from 2022. And the funding for those capital projects follows them. So we don't have to come up with new funding for 2022 capital projects, and we'll go through the capital plan. I feel like I'm on the wrong page. So the global tax requisition change is a way that we have termed here to describe the change in the tax requisitions when you take every service area and add it together. It's an area to focus on if you want to understand how much tax requisitions are going up for the TNRD as a whole. It doesn't tell you what your tax requisition is going up for your area. It's an important distinction, and I think a reason why some of the directors were more keen on looking or going through the service area presentations more specifically. I just want to note that there was a typo on page 11 in the chart. So there's a slight difference in the number I'm presenting as far as 2023. And that's because I changed these on Friday afternoon and missed updating that one chart. So it's a slight difference of $22,000, but it changes the percentage for the better. I think the one in the budget document was 5.7, and this is showing 5.68. In the agenda package, are they? Okay,
Just I'll check with the board. Are you seeing the same, the page numbers that are referenced are the same?
They're not lining up, right?
They're not lining up. Yeah,
So
okay.
we just go forward and screen, but not the-
Sorry, yeah.
oh, okay. Interesting. I'm just gonna do a quick peek here.
Should be on page 5.
So page 5 of 22 or 11 of 205. So page 11 of 205. If you look at the bottom right. Oops. Go back. And page 11, so that one lines up. Anyway. Oh, so on your agendas, you only have the top page numbers? In the agenda dot package? Anyway, the printed package, sorry, is the one I went from. Anyway, I'll do my best. You can focus on the screen and hopefully you're able to follow along. So I thought this was an interesting way to look at the taxation over the years. And I went back 10 years. So 10 years ago, we were collecting almost $23 million in taxation requisitions. You can see the line in blue is a tax requisition number each year, working its way kind of up and down over the years where we are today at the 24 million for 2023. I think the most obvious dip is in the tax requisition amount started in 2019 until 2022. And that's when deliberate attempts to offset operating costs with reserve taxation increases with reserve and surplus reductions or funds to offset taxation. So really what that means is you didn't reduce services. The services still cost the same, but you started using other revenues to offset the amount that you needed from taxation. So, and then through 2020 to 2022, there were also some deliberate reductions in the general administration reserve for payments that were required. So that drastically affected the amount of the balance that was in those reserves to continue on with subsidizing operating with reserve and surplus funds. And I think the COVID relief reserve also utilized over that time to kind of offset some of the operating costs. Services weren't reduced or removed. And once those reserves and surpluses are no longer there, the operating costs are the same, the tax jumps up. So that's what we start to see in 2022 and 2023.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I really like this graph. It's simple and it illustrates a lot of different points. Carla mentioned a lot of them with the taxation going down as an effort to shelter people from the burden of COVID extra costs and things that were going on. Clearly, that's not sustainable in the long run. We've turned around and coming back. We're charging more now to try and get back where we were. Concurrently to that, once COVID finally managed to sort of turn the corner on that, we entered into a period of high inflation and higher interest rates. So it's kind of a double whammy. It's making it tough to get back on track there.
So just to show that point, we went and we looked at the consumer price index increase that was happening year over year from 2013 to 2023. So that line in red essentially is if we had the 2013 tax requisition amount and we added the cost of inflation from there up to 2023, where we would be today is at the top red mark of $27 million. So you can see that steep incline start to happen kind of at the end of 2020, and then it's just gone up sharply, and we're seeing that everywhere. The other interesting thing here is if we did from 2013 just a modest 1% tax increase year over year till 2023, we would be right where we are today. So about just a little higher actually. At about $25 million of tax requisition. So really wanted to show, I think this very visually shows the challenges we're having, but everyone is having right now with this inflationary increases across the board and hitting us all at this time.
Thank you. Just to be clear then, that 5.68% number that you're telling us we're dealing with is before you apply any reserves or surpluses, or is it after you've applied reserves or surpluses?
It is after we've applied the reserves and surpluses. So we take the total expenses we need to operate. We back essentially take off the total amount of other revenues and grants and everything that we can get to pay for that, whatever's left is the amount required to support taxation, or that we need from taxation to support the services. So that 5.6 is at the very end after everything is taken into consideration. So we jump into just on the back end of that story. I wanted to show you the reserves. So we gradually year over year are increasing the reserves. When capital projects are high, those capital projects will draw from reserves. That's what's happened in over 2021 and 2023. We have a lot of capital projects being supported by those reserves, but also right in that time, a drastic reason for that decline is we used a substantial portion of the reserves to fund operating, and we had to pay out a substantial amount from the reserve. Now, if you've looked at the reserve list, we have an extensive amount of reserves. The reserve that I'm talking about that would support overall general administration is your administration reserve. The other ones are very specific to supporting only their services. The one that would benefit all is the one that obviously supports administration that gets charged out to everyone. So this is where we start to see a decline in the reserve balances overall. Now we still have a healthy balance in reserve. It's just the one that we need to support and offset tax increases are no longer available. The other reason for the decline that you're seeing from 23 to 27 is that we don't right now have a long-term capital plan that's funded. And that's something that we're working on and building. Everybody kind of has their own little capital plan in their area. What we need is a consistent one template capital plan, and then we make sure that capital plan is funded, which would mean we would need to transfer from into reserves so we can support the capital in the long run. That's a discussion that throughout the next year, hopefully I can bring to the table, and we'll focus on a little bit more, and we'll start to see that reserve line change. But from what I can tell previously, we didn't look or budget much past the year or two. Although we did present a plan, it didn't have any large capital projections beyond the second year out in the plan. So we're just seeing the result of not having those long-term plans in place right now. So we're just going to go into the draft financial summary section. Oh, well, what page are you on?
I haven't got the version to change this info
Oh, okay.
at the end.
I really flipped through it, didn't I? So overall here, I just wanted to give you an example of where the operating revenues are coming from. Majority of the operating revenues. Once at the end of this, when we provide you with the PowerPoint presentation, you'll be able to see this more clearly, because I know the numbers are quite small here. But you can see a large portion of our revenues are coming from the tax requisitions. We have the 13 million of MFA payments in there that aren't directly related to supporting our operating budget. There's grants in lieu of taxes, provincial and federal grants. Some administration charges internal to other areas. We have some user fees, tipping fees, some planning and solid waste fees. You can see they only make up a small percent, and some other miscellaneous revenues and reserve transfers making up about 6%. So the majority made up by the tax requisitions. And when you go through this, this will just show you the numbers that were used to create that chart. So you can refer to the numbers if you like. This is showing, we show the utility revenue separate from the general operating, and that's because utility revenue utility revenues are coming from tolls and user fees. They are not coming from taxation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any way, Carla, that on the previous slide, when we look at some of these breakdowns, is it possible to put the percentages in on the variances? So we don't have to figure out ourselves? Is that something that?
The
we want?
percentages here on the charts.
Yeah, is it possible so that when we see variances, that we know what a percentage that would be? Other than just a number?
Yes. Yeah.
Did we ever do that in the past?
I created all this here to present to you. They're probably in the summary of revenue and expenditures.
Okay.
Would be in there, just looking at the one I'm seeing, and it might pop up here. It does have them beside. So these directly tie into your financial statements. So as I come upon that, I'll try and point out where the percentages are.
All right, thank you.
So again, those are just the numbers from the financial statement that are creating that chart for you to look at. This here is the summary of revenue and expenditures. Essentially the financial statements, and this is where if we do a quick double check in here, so page 30 and 35 of my budget document is, well, and it's the attachment. If you go to attachment 1, page 1 of attachment 1. So essentially, I just want to show you where this is. This again lists out all the revenues year over year to come to the total revenue amount that we're reflecting of the $78 million. And that's directly offset by $78 million worth of expenditures, which you would see through there. What you're going to see is a number of different line items that were referred to in those other charts that showed all the separate types of revenue. And when it gets into, it'll show you the general fund revenue and the utility fund revenues. Then it gets into expenditures. So the expenditures in this format, in this summary, are listed by what we have as departments, and that's how we operate. So we have different departments that operate the different service areas. That's how these financial statements are broken down. Essentially, no matter what way you look at it, they all add up to the same number. They can just be categorized differently to look at them differently. And I'm going to jump into a summarized departmental statement that it doesn't dive quite as deep into the numbers like this one does. Really, as I said, I just want to make you familiar with the documents that are in this budget package so that you know where to look. There are then, after the summary document, we have each of the departments, and there's a lot of detail. These budgets that you're being given have actually a huge amount of detail. It's almost every line item that we charge to in the budget that you're seeing in detail behind here. So if you were to look at the summary and you wanted to look at library, you find the library there. You dive back into the statements, you will find a specific statement just for the library. And it'll tell you all the revenues for the library and all the expenses for the library. I think in those summaries, that is also where, not on here, but I think within your agenda package, there are the percentage changes at the end. The last column is a percent change from the 1 year to the next. The one thing you'll see when I present this to you for final is I will bring in the actuals. That was something I didn't have time to do, plus year-end results will shift those numbers. So I will bring in the actual results into your final budget presentation so you can look at what we've actually spent. Right now, you're just seeing 2022 budget, not actual values. So I'm going to stop there. After that section, I want to give you guys a chance to ask me any questions on the information there. We will dive deeper next into the departments and then into the service areas.
Anyone have any questions at this stage? Okay, I have Director Grenier. Anyone else? All right, Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. So just following up with what I think you said, you said earlier that you were marrying operating costs and capital costs together. So that last presentation that you talked about where you say you can focus down onto the library department or any of the departments. What we're really looking at is combination of operating costs and capital costs. So I guess my question is, are we able to discern easily in each one of those sections, capital versus operating costs?
Thank you, Chair. We are. So when you go back into there and you went to the specific library statement per se, the operating expenditures are typically on a separate line. So you would be able to see that there's the Ashcroft Library on a separate line. The larger numbers, you definitely be able to tell what's related to capital. Even if you go into the administration line budget, specifically, it shows everything in operating, supplies, telephone, all of those costs separated out wages. Your capital line will say building renovation, plaza work. So it is fairly identifiable when you dive deeper into the statement for just that area.
Thank you, Chair. So just taking that example and you're doing a 5-year presentation, your assumption, if there's a capital item coming online, so let's just say a library is opening up in year 3, you would then put in the operating costs for that library in year 3 as well. But we haven't got to year 3. So if the board decided, oh, we should open that library in year 4, then there would be not just the repercussions of the capital being deferred, but there's the potential for the deferral of the operating costs associated with that capital cost. And your presentation is a 5-year look forward on both capital expenditures, which also drive operating expenditures.
Thank you. So it's a big question. First off, the 5-year plan that has been presented to you previously and this one does not have a full 5-year capital outlay in it. It has what we have planned out over the next couple of years, but what you will see when we go through the capital plan is there's high costs for capital in the first 2 years, and then the capital drops right off. However, the second part of that question saying if there's a capital building that's being put in, the operating costs that go with it should be there. And you'll see that in the fire department, you know, where we've predicted we're going to build a fire department, and in that year it's going to become operational. We try and input that operating budget in there. You should be able to go to the specific budgets and see that in there. Now, I cannot guarantee at this point that all future capital has operational considerations because over the last 2 months, I have not been able to get that far into it. But what I hope to do is bring you guys throughout the year a much more detailed capital plan that would take into consideration total impact. So long, elaborate question, but typically, yes, if you didn't want to do a capital project and we included the operating, you could remove that operating service. All right, so we are going to look at the changes by department, and this is where if you ask specific questions in relation to the department, I will probably defer to one of my colleagues to answer that for you. Although, you know, we work pretty closely together, we have a lot of the answers. It's probably good to introduce them and have them be able to talk to you guys a little bit as well. So that may come up through here. On what I have as page 17. Give you guys the right number. So it's within the report, 11 of 22 in the report, 17 of 205 in the agenda package. You have a departmental statement of changes. What this is showing to you is by our grouping of departments, the cost that that department costs in 2022 and the expenditures that it costs in 2023 with a variance there. And that variance directly relates to the total increase in operating expenditures that we've been talking about. So I have a high level overview of the increases. I'm not going to go into that because I've kind of talked to you about the inflation and wages and different things that are affecting pretty much all the departments. I am going to open this up to you. But what I'm going to do before I do that, one of the largest impacts we're having right now because of the scope of our world changing through COVID is around IT, our IT technology and costs. So what I wanted to do to kind of give you guys those answers before we move forward is have, is Randy here? Did he sneak out? Oh, he snuck out already. Hey, hey. I was just looking for you.
I just wanted to make an entrance.
Yes, timing, good timing. That was excellent timing. So my opening just was talking about the departmental changes, the cost of IT and how they're changing for us right now. And the opportunity for you, if you want to use your microphone there, to just give them an overview of what we've been affected with going into 23.
Yes, I think it really ties back into COVID, you know, in 2020 and 2021, we all got to work from home, mandated to work from home. And well, we were trying to keep ourselves safe. The cyber attackers in the world were trying to make us unsafe. So they increased their attacks on organizations by like 2000%. So we had to mitigate and make some changes. So we did some pen testing. We engaged with cyber insurance providers. They all recommended that we make changes to our network, to systems that we have, which were aging. So no more end of life products that didn't tie to subscriptions. So we had to upgrade those. So we did a network refresh project, which was approved by the board earlier last year. So that would have been last year it was approved, largely supported through the COVID grant, as well as a grant from MIABC. Those products do come with a general operating cost sort of after that project is completed and the products are implemented. So new firewalls and new switches throughout the organizations. Those support sort of a zero trust network, they call it. So every packet, every security thing is being inspected all the time to sort of sort out if there's an attack vector in our network. So those products were purchased, and one of the main highlights in there was our mail server, which we hosted on site, have done so in my entire career. Now it became too big of a risk to even get cyber insurance. So they recommended that we move that into the Microsoft Cloud, the Office 365. That comes with another operating cost because all the licenses per user are no longer a perpetual based license, they're subscription based. So every vendor in the industry, in the technology industry, seems to think subscription-based licensing is the way to go, but it also increases our costs. So instead of having your Office Outlook and Word program, you buy it once, you could have it for 7 years until it becomes end of life. We pay for a new license on a yearly basis now per user, per seat. So that was a big increase. You know, a bunch of other requirements that they wanted from us, offline backups. And so that means you have to have your backup here on site, which is traditional, but now you have to have another one that's in the cloud as well. So that sort of doubled your cost for doing backups. Remote management detection systems. So that is always analyzing the traffic and sends us alerts when there is problems with our accounts, either user accounts, access to our mail server. As an example, we got one over the weekend. There was 18,000 attempts to get into our mail server. So it just alerts us that, hey, we are currently under attack. So it is happening. Our cyber insurance reports showed that our level of government is a mid-level government with X amount of employees, and it is actually top on the list for the attack vectors for those cyber attackers. So it's not that we're not at risk, we're definitely at risk. So most of those things increased our budget, and I apologize to all the taxpayers. I am a taxpayer. It wasn't my agenda to raise taxes for everyone, but It's my agenda to keep the TNRD safe, so we're not in the news that we came under a cyber attack and that all our data is currently held under ransom. So there's still a long way to go in IT to get secure for all the requirements that are being proposed to us by cyber insurance, by the penetration test that we did. But we're getting there, and a lot of these increases come from that, both capital and operating. And I think one of the capital expenses this year are our telephone system, which is end of life, so it doesn't have support on it either. So we're looking at just replacing that. It's the cost of it went up a little bit. We haven't sent out an RFP to get the actual cost back, but we did some estimations throughout the year last year. So that cost is pretty close to the voice over IP telephone system we put in 10 years ago. But there's been, a huge jump in inflation the last couple of years. So everything in technology costs more. And then we're looking at sort of formalizing our records management as well. So that's a capital cost for this year too. So in general, the cyber attacks in the world have increased our costs, and some of our end of life products in IT are increasing our costs for this year. And I don't have any more COVID grant monies to pay for it again. So any questions? I know security is not a lot of fun, but it's every day in our lives right now in IT. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Randy, how much do you think it's going to be this year? Because you don't really have it itemized. What do you think that cost will be?
Yeah, so the operating increase costs are 219,000, and then our capital costs are 200,000.
All right, yeah, because that was one of the largest individual impacts I wanted, Mr. Deal, just to be able to bring that information to you. I thought that was quite important. The other, before we get into opening this up for questions at this point, I just want to point out, so the overall increase or impacts in the areas are, if I talk about general government services, this is where you're going to see, you see that $2.2 million increase. Remember, $1.4 million of that is IT coming out of library, and library would have decreased. And the other large portions of that there that really were outside our control were, there was a $400,000 transfer from reserves supporting operating that's no longer available. And surplus reduction of about 200,000. So that makes up a majority of that total that's coming in. And then I think there's another $700,000 there that I'm more than willing to go through. Overall, you've heard from Mr. Deal on the $400,000 increase in IT. There's a $200,000 impact due to $150,000 worth of negotiated wage increases. And the deputy CFO position that was supported last year would be seen as an increase in there. The only other increases you're going to see that make up that number is from EA administration. That are things that are administration costs that are specifically only charged to the electoral areas. And a few of the changes in there are directly wage related for the most part. And that's because we've added a fire training coordinator. So part of that was covered under EA. And the way that we're paying for our community services coordinators. So Sherry and Joe, they are now being covered in EA. But what you'd see for those is that the wage for those were going to the individual services. So cemetery, economic development, parks, some in halls. So if you went and looked at those services, you'll see those costs going down to offset these increases here. But the true increases, like I said, the $400,000 in IT, the CFO, deputy CFO costs, and the wage increases are your majority of your cost increases coming from that section. The other departments, now there are going to be people here that have dove right into the financial statements and went line by line, and maybe you have questions and maybe you don't. But what I'd like to do is open it up to you now to see if there's any departmental financial statement questions that you had for the team at this point.
So if you have any questions for any of the departmental team members who are here, this is the time to ask them. So we have Director Grenier. Anyone else have any questions right now? Director Stamer? Anyone else? Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. In that 1.3 million transfer from library to general. When I was looking at the library, of course, it doesn't show a 1.3 because there's some offset. And I think it was about 300 grand, 380 grand. And it suggested, when I read it, it suggested that that was some kind of an internal charge. So my question is it a real charge or is it just a charge between departments, and what's the impact in the real dollars?
Thank you. It's a great question. One, I won't defer to Judy at this, just at this juncture, because part of this is just in relation to this transfer. So yes, you would expect that the library would be showing a minus 1.4 million, and it doesn't. It only shows a minus 790,000. Really, that is because the library, then there was an arrangement made that the library held all the IT costs. So there was no need to charge an administrative fee to the library for all the services that the TNRD provides the library. But once the IT service was moved out, that became apparent that then the library was not hosting or holding any charges to support the overall administration. So there was an internal transfer. Essentially, the library is paying an administrative fee of 5% for the services that are provided by the TNRD, and that goes to offset the administrative costs that go out to everybody. So that is an internal transfer that helps one budget, but doesn't help another. But because that's how we charge out our services, that's something that happened there. The increases I think you would be focus in on for the library are the increases in their operating costs. And those equated to, I think they were about $587,000 worth of increases that were not the internal administrative fee. And we can list those out for you if you'd like. And Judy, I can either pass the torch or I can go through my list, whatever you. Would you like me to just go through the list of changes there?
Thank you. I just want to make sure then that when there was that offset charge, that internal charge, is that a real cost? It's a cost to the library for IT services, but it's not a cost to the taxpayer that's going to float down.
Yeah, thank you. That is correct. Because it's affecting, so as I said, the library requisition and the administrative requisition get charged to the same people. So although the library requisition goes up for that admin charge, the administration goes down for the revenue that's coming in. So overall, it's a nil effect. It's just where it's being shown in the requisitions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is to, we can turn the page over to solid waste and recycling to Mr. Vieira. I'm looking at the budget. Last year was 13.4 and this year is projected to be 12.9 with approximately $473,000 less. Can Mr. Vieira explain to me why he believes that's going to occur? And then knowing that we're going to be having to renew our contract with solid waste, could he give us a little bit of in time of what's to expect in the next 5 years? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for that question. So I guess I'll start. Generally speaking, the big impact is that we had a large capital project on the books last year. The Boston Flats Eco Depot was completed. So just point out that chart that we're looking at here on page 17, that includes the capital expenditures as well. So year to year, those fluctuate, the capital built in there are going to see the fluctuations. That being said, your comment about operating costs and renewing the contract, we have built in operating cost increases into the budget. I think we were projecting, do we know what percentage we built into operating cost?
Well, we redid the 2023 based on updated holding data, and tonnages, as well as an increase of, I think, 2%.
Okay. Yeah, so we built in increased operating costs going forward. And obviously we'll have a better sense of that once we complete the tender process this year, which would be obviously reflected in next year's 5-year financial plan going forward.
Thank you.
Any other specific departmental questions at this time? No?
There's an area, I'm not sure how much the board received information on capital in the past. I've put it out there, the 5-year plan that I have that's built into the financials. This doesn't really relate to our overall capital plan we have throughout the regional district. It's not like a municipality where you have capital all under one area. We have capital in many different areas. So we have many different capital plans that have to come into one area. So this isn't perfect, but what it is giving you a very detailed snapshot of what we're going to do for 2023. And then you start seeing it, you go from $23 million in 2023, and it drops off to $4 million and 1 million, 1.7, 1.7. You can see this is where I would like to get to, is having this more consistent number flowing year over year so that we can actually fund that and then appropriately put away money. And if it's not taxation, if it's what I would like to have done is have taxation attribute to reserve funds and reserves pay for capital. And that keeps it very clean. Operating capital separate. I can show you consistent operating increases. And then even if we're putting money into reserves and taking it out for capital, it's keeping those things separate. But I'll take care of that for you. What I want to just bring to your attention is that we don't have a really good capital outlook that I can bring you. I brought you what I could pull together in a short period of time, and it really gives you an idea of what's happening in 2023. What I really tried to do is show to you guys the funding plan that says, look, a majority of the funding for capital comes from grants, comes from gas tax, essentially. And a majority of these larger projects is in utilities and solid waste. And a few of them are outliers like this building and a few of the other buildings, and some of our equipment. The other piece of this is fire trucks and trucks in our fleet equipment. Those are the things that you're going to be seeing more consistently in here. We have very little borrowing, but what we do have for borrowing, I think it's $1.8 million. I have a list of the things that we're paying for right now. And the borrowing coming in here are for fire departments mainly. And I think there's a utilities borrowing, and I don't have them right in front of me, but I have them in my book if you need them. Yeah, so I just wanted to stop here. Open this up as a new opportunity for us to discuss what we have here as capital for the TNRD, and just for you to see kind of our funding outlay. So I'll open that up for questions.
Thank you, Director Stamer. I know you have a question. Director Blackwell. Anyone else? Grenier, Laird. Director Stamer, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Fox. Are we going to have the opportunity in our strategic planning sessions to be able to break out on this so that we can, once we get an understanding of, you know, what some of the needs are within our communities, we'll be able to track it exactly as you mentioned, you know, having the reserves to be able to, you know, pay for these types of major capital expenditures and be able to plan as we go forward in our 5-year or even, you know, stretch it out to a 10-year plan. I know that was part of the strategic planning at the previous board, and COVID came along and kind of got us off the rails. But is that something that you anticipate that you would want us to be able to do?
Director Stamer, if I may jump in, certainly if that's what the board wishes to do, I think that strategic planning session coming up in March is kind of wide open right now. And to me, that would be one of the big priorities is making sure that we get our reserve contributions and some of our capital plans 5 years out would be a priority for me. Whether the board chooses that or not will be up to the board in March. Yep.
Director Blackwell?
Yes, thank you, through the chair to Ms. Fox. Just maybe a brief explanation of what can be assigned to parcel tax for the group here as far as items that can be charged under parcel tax. And yeah, I would agree with Councillor or Director Stamer on stretching out our capital planning for as many years as we possibly can. I think that's critical, and I look forward to the use of your new software to help us with such things.
Thank you. So the parcel tax itself, my understanding is mainly to recover debt costs, borrowing. Is there a better?
Yeah.
That
That's typically, and that's approved by the constituents participating in the service upfront.
Sorry, just a follow up, what types of services would generally be funded or debt recovered under that?
Your utilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, fire departments as well.
Thank you.
Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. I'm new and I've got maybe simple questions, but I'm trying to get a base level of understanding. When I read this, and you've reiterated that most of these capital projects, 93% of them are funded by grants, 7% by taxation. Now, is that the norm, or is that an exception? Because what I am under the impression is that, you know, maybe you get a grant for 50% or 60%, you got to come up with 40. It's a whole different dynamic if you're saying to the taxpayers, you put in 7 cents for every dollar of service. That's a pretty good deal. And that, my hat's off to you if that's what you're doing, 93.7. But I just want to make sure that we're not somehow missing something that is really 50-50 or 60-40 or something else. So it's a pretty base question. And is it to every capital project? In other words, does a capital project not get funded or built until that 93% is in place through the grant? So that's a couple questions.
I have not, oh, my microphone is on. I have not gone back many years to look at what the trend would be. What I would say from my experience is a large portion of capital is funded by grants. We have the flexibility in gas tax that it doesn't have to be matched. It can be 100%. So a lot of the grants that we're getting aren't based on that. However, capital projects are not happening until funds are available. So it's really inhibiting and directing what we're investing into, because, and I should say, even from that, I say 7% from direct taxation. You could consider that reserves were once taxation, right? So reserves are money that we taxed for at one point and put into a reserve fund. Direct taxation to 2023 is the $1.6 million. And you can see that's trying to be consistent, because that's where I would like that line not to exist in the capital plan. What I would rather see is money going into reserves and no taxation directly funding our capital, because that's where we're now trying to make sure solid waste tax requisitions, that's where most of that capital is coming from, aren't bouncing around because we have large capital fluctuations here. But anyway, I went on a tangent on that one.
You have a
Okay,
supplemental?
thank you for that explanation. So it's not precise to say 7 and 93. It's 7 from this year. Could be a whole lot of 7s from previous years. And then there's the grant. And so when we make decisions on capital projects, we don't want to be thinking, oh, we're only putting in 7 cents to the dollar. We're putting in 7 cents this year, 7 cents next year, until that builds up, and then a grant. So the project doesn't happen until all the money's in place or committed. But we are actually funding more than just the 7% if it's applying reserves.
So yes, in this case, if you look at this number and 1.6 million being 7% and 3% or 3 million coming from previous year's taxation, you've got maybe, you know, another 5. Sorry, I'm trying to calculate on the spot here, but I can only comment on what's happening there for 1 year. But it is much more complicated in that, because if you go into a municipality, you do up all the capital plan and you're taxing one area. This is unique to that. So you have a utilities capital project. It's only getting charged to that area. Not every other area is paying for that. So that project, if they need that capital, it is not going to rely on reserves. Your taxes are going to jump way up. There's some little service areas where their taxes are jumping up and down quite a bit because they have to pay directly for the capital that they're charged. That's why there's a parcel tax component built in there as well. So it does have a level that's a little bit more complex than just coming up with a scheme of how to fund overall capital.
Can
Oh,
I add to that? One of the considerations that comes into this is a lot of your capital replacement and major repair that is capitalized is fairly minor in nature and is easy to flow through those reserve accounts. Major equipment, major capital expansion requires a ton of money. They have to be looked at on a project by project basis and examine all the funding possibilities available to them. Part of the reason why you don't get to see a lot of stuff in the back end of that plan is because it's not clear at this point in time what that grant funding will be available for going forward.
I'm going to go to Director Laird and then Director Stamer, circle back to Director Grenier, and then I think we'll move on unless we have CAO Hildebrand also. Or
If I could just add to that comment, Chair Roden, I think to sum that conversation up, we are very grant dependent in this organization with the lack of a strategy going forward on capital. And that's been the case for some time. And that in my experience over the last 3 years, but I don't know, Jamie, would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, that would be a correct general statement. I would say one step further to reiterate what Carla said. It's very dependent on the service and the ability of the service to pay for capital. So in some cases, we simply cannot do a capital project unless it's 100 or 90% grant funded because the tax base won't support it because of the size of it. In other cases, bigger, larger, different services may be higher funded. So just to clarify, yeah, we can't just attach a percentage that all of our capital projects are X amount funded by grants and X amount from taxation. It's very, very dependent on the service. And each of those capital projects would work through the process. For example, if utilities won, the utilities committee would work through it and understand what the funding mechanism would be for each individual capital project.
Director Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question around the Canada Community Building Fund. I think that previously was called gas tax. Each area director has been allocated a certain amount of funding from that gas tax community building fund, and it's done on a per capita basis. But I don't see a breakdown anywhere where it indicates which each area director has in their availability to actually do community projects. Is there a possibility of breaking it down for each area director so we know what we're dealing with? I know we all have ongoing projects and we're a little concerned as to where the building fund is going to. We rely on that to improve our communities, and each area director has their projects that we're working on. I was just wondering if there's a breakdown for each area director to look at. Thank you.
thank you. Great question. So capital discussion, we will have a more detailed capital discussion during strategic planning. We'll work that out with Scott. The gas tax reconciliation, gas tax wasn't impacting the budget per se at this point. However, we do have a current gas tax reconciliation. If I could just get through the year-end numbers, I want to reconcile that and then I would send it out to all of you, which my next focus next week is on year end. So I'm hoping that that is something that I can get out to all of you as where your gas tax allocation is sitting, working in the year end numbers. I didn't want to do that preemptive to that. And yeah, hopefully that will meet your needs.
Thank you. I know we all have projects that we're looking at to move forward with this year, and it would help us to make those decisions when we go to talk to people in our communities. Thank you.
Director Stamer? Mr. Hildebrand?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that point as well. And just to be real clear, the capital projects we're talking about is assets that we own. So there's a differentiation between the good work that the EA directors do in the community. In the communities is not assets that we typically own. So that's the one clarification I wanted to make. So we'll make sure we talk through that as we review that and talk about capital in general.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, very good point from Director Laird. I just want to circle back quickly on when we were talking about long-term capital planning and reserve planning. And in the past, and I know I'm just speaking from a small municipality, but the comment was made that in a lot of cases, you need grant funding because you don't have the population to be able to pay for some of these capital expenses. And I agree on some of them to a point, but other ones, the way they were set up is that there were money set aside in a reserve for a new fire truck or whatever those things that were going to be. And I think that's part of what we're looking at going forward is making sure that we do have adequate planning. So we're not asking the whole regional district to help support particular areas that should be able to support it themselves. And, you know, we used to have it set up where even simplified in some of the budgets, we try to save 10%. Now that sounds like a big number, but that's what we were trying to achieve. So if all of a sudden, if we needed a new garbage truck, we could buy a new garbage truck in that period of time because we were prudent in the way that we went through our budgets. So I think we can simplify the process. And when we go forward and look at some of these needs throughout the regional district, there shouldn't be any reason why we can't have a 5-year plan where a lot of these things could be saved for and paid for. Thank you.
Okay, I have Director Grenier and then Director Middleton, and then we'll move on to the next chapter.
Thank you, Chair. So just following up on this capital operating and reserve business. You had said there's this reserve and the reserve is building up over years. So that number of 7% that I talked about could be several years of 7%. First question would be, can you access those reserves for operating instead of capital items? Can you take from reserves, but apply them to operating expenses instead of capital items that reserve is being built up? That's the first question.
Each capital reserve has a bylaw that specifically states what it can be used for. We are starting to build a few areas where they have a little bits of operating reserves, but a majority of our reserves are capital reserves. Capital reserves have titles for what service they go to. They have to go to that service. So no, you cannot use a capital reserve for an operating expenditure. However, the board can make decisions that trump, you know, the bylaw. They can go and change the bylaw if they want, but how we guide it is we follow the bylaw, and we cannot fund operating from capital.
So the second part of that question then is, if it's not being used generally for operating costs, then presumably, and this is where I think you were going, we can have an aged capital plan, a 5 or 10-year capital plan. We can say in 2023, our 7 cents went in, in 2024, our 7 cents went in, so that's 21 cents over 3 years. Now we don't need a grant that is 93%, we need another grant, but we know where we are on the schedule for each of the major capital items. So picking on library, for example, we got another library we're trying to build. As directors, we can say, here's how much money we got in the bank from our surpluses that we built up towards that library. Here's what we need left to build that library. And that kind of aged capital schedule would be really useful in seeing where these items are ready to come on stream and what aren't ready to come on stream. If that can be dealt with.
So
Thank
we will look at pulling a long-term capital plan together. The problem right now is you essentially need 21 capital plans, and then they gotta be amalgamated into one capital plan, and then all the reserve funds that fund those have to be kept very separate. So it gets a little bit more complex, but that's what I am working on and hope to bring forward to you over the next while.
And thank you, Director Middleton. I have not forgotten you, but just quickly, Director Stamer just suggested a 10-second elevator pitch about the difference between reserves and surpluses.
So reserves are intentional decisions to put money to tax and put money into a bucket. Hopefully it's not a real bucket, but you know what I mean. And there we have many of them. We have 90 different buckets or more that we manage. Surpluses are a result of a budget coming in under budget. So you had $100,000, you said you were going to spend 100, but you only spent 50. You get a $50,000 surplus. The surplus has to be brought in to the next year's budget as revenue to go back to the taxpayer. So just so you know, and that's every budget has its own surplus that comes back in as revenue to offset taxation. So essentially it goes back to the taxpayer. But
Director Middleton.
This question, I'm just jumping back and I'm jumping forward and I'm just looking for direction where I might be best to find the information. And I don't know a lot about it. And that's the Film Commission.
okay,
And just when we see, you know, the Film Commission, the expenditures going out of 366. And I jump forward and I see that there's anticipated revenue of 45,000. Does a TNRD receive grant money for that? Is this Film Commission, say like an offshoot of like library where we're providing a service to sort of the public where the cost of providing that service doesn't generate revenue to provide it? So we subsidize it in a sense. Can I get a 2-second blurb on Film Commission, or can you direct me where I could find that?
absolutely. So just want to make sure that you know that within the budget, and if you email me, I can tell you or send you exactly that piece of the Film Commission if you can't find it in the document. But there is a specific statement just for the Film Commission. The department surpluses do show Film Commission showing the $48,000 savings there. And I'm going to ask Terry to come up and give you a blurb on the Film Commission.
If it's appropriate for now. I mean, maybe you don't
Yeah,
want
she
to
can
get
talk
burdened
about
down with details that, you know, maybe nobody else wants to hear about.
She can just give you in general the Film Commission and the revenues and expenditures and.
Thanks for the invitation. I love talking my jam. So the Film Commission is funded partially through grants. And so a part of the increase that you're seeing is because we have a surplus year over year from us being successful with grants. So we're not utilizing as much of the taxation as we had previously. So that is one of the reasons why you see a marked increase to the Film Commission's budgets. In the last couple of years, film development and film production has been increasing over the last couple of years. And the amount that we're looking to bring in for the Film Commission is bringing us about to the amount that we were receiving a couple of years ago prior to COVID, when we had received even more funding throughout COVID. And of course, there is also the increase in inflation of everything that we do. One of the bigger things that we offer is scouting to various locations and taking new imagery and taking film producers to the different areas of the TNRD fuel consumption, and the cost of fuel is increasing steeply with that as well. So I hope that that kind of addresses some of the questions that you may have had, but yes, we are funded partially by other grants as well. Anything else?
Director Blackwell.
Thank you, Carla. I'm sorry. What's the economic benefit to the region roughly from the film industry coming to this area?
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at this one as a loss leader. in a lot of senses. I mean, maybe it's not, because maybe you generate enough in revenue, income, whatever, grant funding for this. But the economic impact to hotel rooms, business, catering, local employment, what is that?
Yeah, it's a big increase. So I think that when you look at what we're funded, which is about less than 400,000, close to that. And it costs the individual taxpayers about $1 to $2 per household. We're bringing in about $18 million of direct spend. And that's not even the offshoots of what we do for economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. And this Director Stamery reminded me this is a good time to point out, if you have not had a chance to see it, in case you're wondering about the impact of movie making, Movie Maker magazine has listed Kamloops, British Columbia as one of the best places, top 10 places, small cities to live and work as a movie maker.
Yes.
So this is an industry magazine noting that Kamloops is one of the best places to be if you're a movie maker. So that we can't put a price on what that's worth, but it's got to be worth something.
Thank you for that. That was announced just today at noon. So very exciting news. And I did try for the entire region. They only allow me to put forward cities. So we went with the city of Kamloops, but I did try for the entire region.
All right, any other comments, questions? All right, thank you very much. CFO Fox.
All right, thank you. There's a question from Zoom.
Director Sao, I hope you haven't had that up there for a very, very long time.
No, I actually lowered it because I thought we're moving on. But if you got a few seconds, just a comment about the what Mr. Hildebrand said. We're very being grant funded and driven. Because recently I was just talking to Mr. Hildebrand and also Mr. Vieira about solid waste management properties that are leased out to places like the pipeline camp in Clearwater, and how those could be, revenue generators. And perhaps in the upcoming 5-year plan, we can have a bit of a discussion about moving us towards, focus a bit more on revenue generation. I wonder if that's possible.
Thank you for the question and through the chair. So given that question and that conversation that we have, I have staff actually doing a complete inventory of all of our assets that we have from land holdings and just understanding what that assessed value is, so that the board has that information as they go into their meetings in March for strategic planning over the next 5 years.
Thank you.
All right. I was a little shocked. I forgot there was someone on there, so I apologize. We have a heavy section to move through next. It's going to take at least an hour. So I'm wondering if, do we need to call a break or 5-minute break or something?
Yeah. I think a 10-minute break for coffee and water and anything else people need. We'll see you back here at 20 to 3.
I didn't want to do it, but I had to. We have a heavy section left. I wanted to give them only a minute.
I was actually thinking about, and please to meet you. I was thinking along the lines, like from a municipal's perspective, is that yes, that surplus goes back into reserve or goes back as revenue. But it also gives you the flexibility. You can use that surplus where you want to. So if you're going to put $50,000 into a fire reserve,
yes,
50,000's got to go into fire reserve. You got an extra 25,000 that's in water. You can take that 25,000 and put it into fire.
Yes,
because it's a surplus. So you're allowed to do that. That's what we do.
You cannot take a fire surplus and put it into water.
There are
can't.
strict firewalls between each.
No, it's the difference between, oh, no, sorry, you can use, but no, that's right, you can't, but you can still use it. So the surplus in the fire department can go into surplus, but it can also be used in the fire department. It doesn't have to go into the reserve. If it's earmarked for the reserve, it has to go in the reserve.
Yeah.
That was what I was making the distinction between the two.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get money into reserve, that's great, but you lose the flexibility in what you can use. It for.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're in water, it can be into, say, part of your sewer, but if it's water and sewer, you can put it into pumps. You can do all kinds of things, but if it's specifically in one reserve, you can't. Is that right? No.
I thought it might work, it didn't. If everyone could take their seats, please, we're about to get going. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and CFO Fox, over to you.
Thank you. So we're gonna move into talking a bit more about the taxation requisition increases. And what that kind of looks like for municipal and service areas. So when I look at the assessment change summary, it shows the assessment jump from 22 to 23 based on the first, we've got a revised, or sorry, a completed roll that was provided to us at the beginning of 2023. We have not got the revised roll. The final roll with final assessments will come in March. So that could change things up a little bit, but this is the assessment as it stands right now. And really what we talked about is there's two at 8% increase. Everybody's increased and everybody else is double-digit increases. So you have Area I and you have Logan Lake at 8% assessment increase. Everybody else is quite high. And you'll see when we get into the tax implication section with Scott Reed, how that will affect the amount you pay before budgets even change. So I just want to show you this document. What I'm showing you guys here again is the assessments, total dollars being paid by the different areas and the total amounts, which would translate into the financial statement. So the very bottom total, the $24.7 million with, a bit of rounding because calculating taxes goes down to the infinite decimals. And we do our budgets based on rounding, so it could be out little amounts at the end, just if you're comparing documents.
There are also specified services that I think are not represented in those totals, aren't there?
That's right. Yeah. So when I'm bringing up other budget numbers here, I might focus on the municipal and EA total of $22.3 million. If you're looking back to try and compare numbers back and forth. Some people love to compare the budget numbers back and forth, so I'd like to point that out. So the city of Kamloops pays a large percentage of the requisition. The number of services that the city of Kamloops pays for, which is the ones listed here, there are a few, like 911, they pay a separate contract. It's not paid like other areas pay for that service. But overall, the top is the shared services. So you have, and I'm going to go through this one in more detail. Each of the other ones contain very similar information. Some of it changes just based on the service provided in that area. But I think we'll be able to answer a lot of questions in each of these by just going through one of them in more detail. So you see the Thompson Library, Regional Library, General Government Services, Environmental Planning and Zoning, Film Commission, Fraser Basin, Search and Rescue, Regional Parks, and then Regional Solid Waste Management, you'll see is 0. It's not on there anymore, can probably be removed, but it's nice to see what was on there at one time. Mosquito Control South, Thompson River Watershed Management, the subtotal of services, and then an overall requisition of $7 million. Previous year was 6.6. That is a 5.92% increase if you're looking at percentages, but it's a $396,000 total. The reason being here, you see the large increase for Kamloops is because of the way that it's allocated. So the assessment values are taken, and based on how much assessment you have, it will be allocated out. Your portion of the pie that you pay is allocated out based on this allocation that was created. It is one I follow. It is not one I created. It was there pre my time. So there could be discussion of, well, Kamloops pays quite a large piece of the pie. If that is a concern for you, it might be what you want to bring to the table, but it would have to be a separate discussion where you get into debating how taxes are allocated. But right now, based on how that allocation works before any budget changes, because Kamloops assessments increased by 14%, you would have ended up paying a larger share of the pie based on your increased assessments. So I think what I would like to do here is, if there is questions from anyone in general, but I'm sure specifically Kamloops City directors, in regards to the amount of changes in the service. And I think what you would have heard previous is we've kind of broadly touched on why administration costs have gone up, why regional library costs have gone down, minimal changes in the other services where you might see parks go down slightly because of that reallocation to EA admin. Overall, and you will not see, obviously, electoral area administration charged to municipalities. That is a separate line you'll see only there. So are there any questions here from City of Kamloops in regards to the services charges and the changes in the requisition amount? All right, then I can jump to the next one. So we have Clearwater, again, a list of services, a few differences. You see E911 on here. Noxious weed control, Crime Stoppers, protective services, emergency management, Clearwater and District Highway Rescue Service. So you can see those services there didn't appear on Kamloops. They are appearing on Clearwater, and you'll see those in the other municipalities going forward. And then you see a separate section for Bavenby separated out here. Total difference is the $25,000 between the requisition, tax requisition amounts. Are there any questions from anyone on Clearwater? We have Barrier. Barrier, I mean, Barrier should be pretty happy looking at this, I think. 1.6, or sorry, 1.6. Just saying, it's almost like an auction here now. It's only gone it's only gone down slightly, but overall, are there questions here on Barrier?
Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to point out, thank you for that, but Electoral just went up 12.8.4%. So maybe they can help with that discrepancy.
I would guess if we were to look at the assessment changes for Barrier, it is 15% increase. So that increase is offset for the assessment values. The City of Merritt. City of Merritt has a overall requisition increase of about $24,000. And again, you'll see the similar trend that happens, libraries going down, general government services going up. That's the majority of the increase in most of these due to the costs we talked about. The E911 contract has increased, and Mr. Vieira can speak to that if anybody has questions on that. Are there any questions here for the City of Merritt? So the Village of Lytton only has, again, a slight change. Does not look like, and I'll just pause after each one of these to see if there's any questions in regards to the specific area. Clinton has a slight increase of $7,800 on the overall requisition. They have television, no charge for television, but some for cemeteries at the bottom there. The other The other charges are fairly similar to the other requisitions. The Village of Chase has a slight increase of $7,000 to this requisition. The Village of Cache Creek has a decrease of $77. All right. The Village of Ashcroft has a increase of $16,000. And overall, again, you'll see some increases and decreases back and forth, but a majority of that's coming from general government services. District of Logan Lake has a reduction of 31,000. Look at Logan Lake, and Logan Lake is one that had a smaller increase in overall assessment. So that would be the reason that it's staying fairly static. The ones that have really increased will start offsetting and taking more of the pie, reducing the other ones. Sun Peaks. Sun Peaks has, and this is where, you know, very relation to the assessment percent increase here of almost 26% assessment increase. So they started picking up a large chunk of the overall pie that's being charged. And that's actually had an effect on the city of Kamloops because their piece of the pie actually reduced very slightly, but it did. And I believe it's because area A and B in a number of these areas really jumped up. So again, the overall increase, the majority is coming from general government services, but Sun Peaks, before the budget ever changed, would have been paying more. And this is where Scott will reflect a bit for you. So we're making the jump now into electoral areas. And you can see that because you'll start seeing the statement that you're looking at become a lot longer. They have a lot, their list of services is larger. So you're starting to see a few of the different things appear at the bottom: dangerous dog control, recreation and culture grant need, cemeteries, economic development and tourism. One thing I'd like to point out with economic development is that is a place where is going to require a further meeting of the board for some direction. So economic development basically has been a grant and aid. Area A and B have representatives that work for those areas. Economic development in the other areas has essentially been a grant and aid that's provided. There right now is not really a policy that's governing how that money is being spent. There's some understanding, but administration certainly would like more direction from the board on what to do there. What ended up happening is when it wasn't used, it was creating a surplus, essentially to try and keep tax rates at the same rate. The surplus offsetting it, you had to increase the expenses just to keep the tax rates appropriate. So what we did is we have kept the allocations in there for 2023 for economic development, but in 2024 to 2027, the amounts have been removed at this point. And that is because it was no longer reasonable to try and budget the way that we were. So we're going to be needing further direction on economic development going beyond 2023. But for now, the 2023 amounts are in there and decisions can be made over the next year. And you could see those individual budgets if you went into those sections. Are there questions here on electoral area A? Overall increase, 41.
Director Sao?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, we had a bit of increase there. I understand that you was mentioned earlier, yeah, the IT was moved out of the library system, so that should be, you know, going down, and the management or the EA admin would be going up. But I see here it's kind of both going up. Maybe I'll send you an email later to try to understand more of how that breaks down, I guess. Ms. Fox.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, interestingly, if we worked out the budget changes and we only included the assessment changes, your budget for the library would have went up. And we will explain that further to you. You will, when Mr. Reed does his presentation, he will show how that works as well. And then if you still need further clarification, you certainly reach out to myself and Mr. Reed, and we will spend some time with you. And also, if you are one that would like to meet with Mr. Vieira and I one-on-one, we certainly can provide more clarification on the impact of those changes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Electoral area A specified amounts. So this is specific areas that are getting charged for specific services. So I grouped these together, although they're in two separate sections, 2 different pages. I did group these together so electoral area A could see both together. So there's a slight increase of $12,000 here. Scott?
That $12,000 is not indicative of what's happening to those individual items in between there, because those are different, significantly different defined areas for each one. That it doesn't really represent an overall average, being a weighted average like that, but it gives you an idea of that total basket, what's happening.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because obviously Bavenby street lighting isn't impacted by Blackpool Community Hall. They're very specifically charged.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that would be important too, as you're going through this, and if you have specific questions for us when we meet, this is probably an area where you're going to want to get into when you look at your areas, to look at those ones there, because of course your constituents in that area are going to be very concerned about that one line and not the rest. Electoral area B. And this is overall electoral area, not specified area, and the overall increase is $57,000. And I would have the same comments of where the increases and decreases are. This is the electoral area B specified services. So Blue River and area B specific street lighting. Electoral area E with a slight decrease of $2,900 overall. But you can see general common services going up 30 and the electoral area services going down. And this is where you'll see more specifically what I was saying with EA administration going up, but with parks and cemeteries and economic development going down. And you can specifically see economic development tourism has no taxation required because there was surpluses to maintain that budget this year. So we decreased there. Electoral area E specified area. And I think this is a really good way to see, even if this isn't your area, what other service areas are paying, because I imagine going through a document the size of the budget we have, you're gonna fix and look at mainly your area's information. So this is just a bit of an overview. Electoral area E. Did I mix those up? I think I did. Electoral area I. And it's a bit of a reduction in I of about $20,000. And this is a specified areas of electoral area I. Electoral area J, the large increase of $160,000. Although the budget overall here is a larger budget, 1.6 million and 1.8. And area J's assessments went up 20%. So again, without any budget change, they would have saw an increase in the amount they paid.
And Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. I think you'll want to go to the next slide, and then I'd like to ask some questions about the combined effect. And thank you.
Electoral area J specified areas. And please remember that all this information here is provided as an attachment in your document. I believe it's attachment 4. Electoral area L. Oh,
Thank you, thank you. I guess we're going to be going through this as a TNRD board, but I'd like to draw a couple things to my fellow board members' attention. The city of Kamloops had the #1 increase year over year, 396,000. We saw that on this schedule here. The second biggest area is area J, that had roughly half, 160,000 increase. The population of the city of Kamloops is about 100,000, 99,000. That increase works out to about $4 a person. But in area J, there's only 2,000 people living there. The assessments may have gone up, but there's only 2,000 people. And the equivalent is that's gone up $80 a head relative to $4 in the city of Kamloops. So when we talk about spending money and spending, increases and what have you, this formula that we've got has a dramatic increase to the people, the actual 2,000 people that live in area J. And yes, their assessments have gone up, but they're still the same taxpayer. And so I'm wondering, I know that previous councils have talked about reviewing formulas and looking at how effective the regional district is working today versus 30 or 40 years ago. But I can see a trend where we've got some areas, Sun Peaks, area J, others that are increasing at very dramatic rates. And as we share these common items, the burden is falling on those people at an alarming rate. And I don't have a solution for it, but I'm saying, boy, oh boy, when we start looking at things that we're contributing towards, we have to make sure we're getting our dollars worth. And I can say that in some of the area J area, I know we're going to be dealing with it as electoral areas, but we're going to have to look very seriously at whether we continue to participate at the rates that we're participating at, because the taxpayer can't just keep dealing with this at these alarming growth rates. So I just pointing that out. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Fox.
thank you. The other thing Mr. Reed will bring into this is talking about tax impact. When requisitions are allocated, there's different classes within each area. So you'll have residential, industrial, utility, farm class. It will be interesting to look at your areas and see what classifications are being charged out, because we will bring up an example where the industrial rate has gone up and residential tax has gone down because of it. They're absorbing more of the burden, but we'll get into that example as well. So we'll take you through some of that, and Mr. Reed has some really good backup for each of the areas. We won't get through all that, but we'll be able to share that with you, even if we don't get to the specific one you're focused on.
Director Hamer Jackson, do you?
I was just wondering if that is something that should be brought up here, or is that something that should be brought up to the city of Kamloops?
Do you mean when we were looking at the reallocation or the shares of the pie, if you will?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that if the board decides that the amount of the allocation that Kamloops, if the question is specifically to Kamloops or any of the areas, the amount of the allocation that's getting attributed to each of those areas would have to be a discussion with this board, because this board sets that allocation. Whether an individual area like the city of Kamloops wants to bring that up to the board, you would take that to your group and decide if that's what you want to bring forward to this table. And then this table would decide if they want to, look at that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
If we may, so we may not have as much flexibility as was perhaps just presented. So I might have our deputy corporate officer actually explain a little bit as to how it's allocated, and some of it is set and beyond this board's control.
When establishing services, a lot of services are established based on a cost per assessment. And I'm not in depth, as in depth into the budget as Carla is, but for example, when you're talking about libraries, I believe libraries is also one of those where based on assessed value, that's how we tax. And that's a number of our services as well. There may be some where there are some flexibility. I'm not aware what they are, but the majority of them are based on an assessed value per 100,000, sorry, an assessed amount per $100,000 of assessed value. Yeah, and once again, you know what, a lot of it depends on as well as to the type of utilities that you have within your municipality. Whether you have a number of utilities or a number of industrial properties within your municipality, that makes a difference as well.
I think too, if we find out, I'll find out a little further information, and if something is different than what I brought forward, or I haven't brought the right information for it, I'll make sure I make that clarification with you guys. Electoral area L with an increase of about $43,000 in requisition amount. The specified areas of electoral area L. And the specified areas are, it looks like a big jump, but if you look, it's fire protection for Monty Creek, specific to Monty Creek. Electoral area M. And there's a $117,000 increase in electoral area M. Again, electoral area M's assessment values increased by 25%. So they get an increase based on increased assessment values and an increase based on budget.
We're basing these numbers, excuse me, on what have now been the assessments that have gone out by the BC Assessment Authority. We know lots of people are unhappy with those assessments and may be contesting them or trying to get them changed. Do we have any history on how much that assessed value could change between our discussions here now and people actually sort of being successful in perhaps getting their taxes reduced or having their assessed values reduced?
I'm going to allow Scott to speak to that. I don't have the history with regional districts, so.
Yeah, typically first off, the assessed values are based on July of the previous year. There's a completed roll which is released just in the new year, and the revised roll comes out in March. It is subject to those revisions that you're talking about. They're typically not materially different and don't change that allocation. Anything large enough to impact that allocation between different areas and different property classes typically takes a longer time to settle, and it might show up in the final roll report, which shows up later, or even in subsequent years, in which case you'd have to go back in the previous years, make adjustments for what they should have been in the current year's tax requisition. But between the ones we're looking at now and the ones you're going to see at the end of the March, I wouldn't expect to see a significant difference.
And I think too that their BC assessment follows a very rigid calculation for calculating those. That hasn't changed. So although there might be more people contesting them, they would have to have a legitimate reason why the value, maybe there's something material difference, or they haven't claimed that there's no longer this building that's adding value there, but overall, it would be hard to contest the way it's being calculated for sure.
Given that then is we could see perhaps a reduction next year of those set values because they're going to be then based on the sort of the new market values. It's going to be a catch up. So next year, when we're in these discussions here, we could be seeing quite a drop off on those dollars.
Yeah, I would anticipate based on sort of the consensus view of where property prices are going, that would be the case. Assessed values have been lagging market values for a number of years, of course, as they've been skyrocketing up, and it's just a natural regression to the other way now.
Director O'Reilly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for reference for the new municipal directors that are going through the first time through the budget process, this is the same for your municipal government as well. We wait for the final rule to come in from BC Assessment. We think we know what it is, but that's why the tax rate is never set until April, once we get that final number in. So regional districts in the same boat as any municipality out there. So it's kind of I think staff take the best guess of what we think it is, but we really don't know till that number comes in. So thanks, Marlo.
Good. Electoral area M, specified areas. Electoral area N, with a slight decrease of about $4,000. And they're one of the lower percentages. Electoral area N, specified areas. Electoral area O, with an increase of about 100,000, and we can see the electoral areas being consistently having significant increases over the smaller areas. Before that one came up. Electoral area O, specified services. Electoral area P with about $99,000 increase. Electoral area P, specified area. That's probably one of the larger specified area statements with cemeteries and television and parks and fire protection. There's a number of different things, water system and sewer and street lighting. So I want to pause there before we get into the tax impacts. So I'm not sure that this type of presentation has been brought to you before. I didn't know how it would be received because, as you can see, everybody's excited about their area, and there's a number of statements to get through, but I hope it brought you a view of your area's budget and the services that you each provide. You can kind of compare between the two. You kind of see the increases going up and down, and really try and give you an explanation of the different impacts of why your area would see an increase even without a budget change. And that's why we wanted to have Scott with us today to bring his experience and his knowledge around those impacts. He's spent the last almost 2 months with me through this process, looking at the numbers that we're putting together, helping support the document that's calculating taxation. He's familiar with not only where we're sitting right now and taking that information in, but he's also familiar of what regional districts should expect and what has happened. So he can kind of bring that into the conversation. We're going to jump into the section called tax requisitions. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that there's no outlying questions.
We have Director Laird. Yes, Director Houghton. Okay, Director Laird, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a conversation with Carla yesterday about the overall budget. I've been doing budgets here for quite a few years, and this is one of the most easy budgets that I've sat through to understand. It's laid out very well so that if you spend some time looking at it, you usually get a pretty good idea of how our budget works. The previous budgets were quite complicated and they weren't laid out near as well as what we looked at today. And it was nice to see the different presentation. Thank you very much.
Director Houghton?
Yeah, can you just roll back to area P? Did part of the Monty Creek Fire Hall is in their area? Did they partake in the expense part? Not that I'm picking on Lee.
Not that you're picking on Lee, but you waited till she left.
Oh, she left. She had to do a wedding, so. Because I know part of the north side of the river is under the fire protection. I just didn't see it in there.
So for Monty Creek.
The new Monty Creek Fire Hall. Yeah, that area L is paying the biggest portion.
Okay. Jamie?
I could speak to that one. I believe this is something we'll just need to confirm that the service area should include both of those. I think it just didn't show up on this summary sheet by including those properties is what we'll have to get back and confirm. Because the surface establishment area does include properties on both sides, on both sides of the electoral area. Yeah, so it may be it'll probably just be an adjustment, a reallocation.
That's right.
That'll
Thank
be
you.
reflected in the final one.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that feedback, because when we add a service, it adds a number of different things that we're adding. So like Jamie said, it probably got added into the one area and then based on allocation needs to, because it was a new service, miss getting the portion here. So thank you. That's it.
Director Middleton?
Just a quick question as I'm looking around the room and making sure, because I haven't got them all memorized yet. Electoral area P, where is that?
Is this to the east of Kamloops, Sun Rivers area?
I just looking,
Correct?
just only
Yeah, around Sun Peaks.
Sun Peaks. So I just see like the solid waste management is like significantly higher there than a lot of the other places. Is that just because of the area that it's serving or the numbers out there? I just see their solid waste management is up at 600 and up to 606,000, and I'm just sort of cruising back down through a few of the others, and it looks like the others are significantly lower than that. So I just wondered if there was just what there is in there that puts that number up to there. And it was just I'm not disputing the number, I'm just asking what area it is and why their solid waste management is so much higher than the other areas.
Yeah, so the solid waste management service is paid for by all 10 electoral areas and 10 municipalities, everyone excluding Kamloops. And then the total budget of that is split up between those 20 participating areas based on the total assessment. So
Oh, okay.
area P is one of the largest amounts of
Highest
assessment in
areas.
any of
Oh,
the electoral areas. So that's why you'll see there a much higher percentage.
Yeah, okay, nope, that answers that, thank you.
Director Houghton?
I think Jamie answered it because in that particular area, that would partake in all the way down the north side of the river to Chase, which would take in the Pritchard Eco Depot. And then back and then up the North River to McClure and Lewis Creek and up that way. So she's got a big area and a lot of things to look after.
But if I may on that comment, just to clarify, each area doesn't pay just for the services within their area. It's a regional service similar to a library system. So all participating areas fund the single budget for solid waste management.
All right. Turn that on. So just a recap of the global property tax requisition change of what 5.6. Now you can kind of see going through those service areas and the requisition changes that it swings very much between what area you're in, what municipality you're in, how much of the pie, the assessment pie you're taking up. And so the 5.68, although we try and keep that reasonable so that the overall increase is down, you will see swings back and forth. Also kind of thrown up here, the fire services parcel tax, utility frontage parcel tax numbers, and the utility user fee numbers. So you can see very little of the changes are coming from those areas of revenue. It's mainly the tax requisition number. One of the things I really wanted to do with you guys is make sure that what we brought you at this point in January was a very reasonable number. So we've done a lot of work to bring you a reasonable number. Knowing that we only have a month and a half until this has to be adopted, we wanted to introduce this new workshop information session on budget to make sure that you guys are aware and have more consultation, more influence, and more decision-making opportunity within the budget. Bringing this to you set reasonably so the changes between now and when I have to do it again for you, are hopefully not hugely significant. But leaving it at that, this is going back to the tax requisition amounts per municipality, per electoral area, and with the local services specified. I hope when you go to the financial statements and to these documents that you'll be much more familiar with what they are and what makes those up and where you can find the answers. And know that our team is very familiar with the numbers and the changes in the document. I'm going to go back for Scott.
And you can see, as we got a 5.68% change at a global basis. You can see those numbers are all over the board. And that is driven by a number of factors we'll get into a bit more, but it's mostly coming out of the BC Assessment Authority and the data that they provide for that allocation.
When I bring my next presentation of the final draft, the PowerPoint you see will be much more succinct and summarized. So this is your opportunity to see the detail. And I will focus much more for the public, that presentation, and making sure the tax impacts are clearly displayed through that presentation. So that would be the difference, and we wouldn't have to go through every level of detail that we're going through here today. This just shows again the collection breakdown of the overall amount we're collecting and who's paying what. That just shows it in a prettier picture. Kamloops should feel good, like they're really highlighted in that. They're really taking the show there. So the assessment change summary, please remember that there is, it's important, because before us as administration did anything, that assessment there changed the amount you were going to pay. Okay. You want me to pop back to that one?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay. And then I think I'm just going to turn it over to you, Scott, because
Sure, that's fine.
there you go. Scott's got it now.
This one, and because it's a particularly interesting example of the kind of things that go on. If you look at area A there at close to 40% increase in assessments year over year. Now that would lead you to conclude that they're going to pay an awful lot more taxes than they will, but to the residential taxpayer, that was $18 million, I think it was, in construction in utilities. So of course, they're picking up their share at 3.5 times what the residential taxpayer is. So the residential taxpayer is not as impacted by that as that full 40%.
And you're going to show them that.
Yeah, that
detail.
it'll see that flow through in some subsequent sheets.
Just out of curiosity, what was that utility construction? Was that Trans Mountain?
Yeah.
That's already showing up on. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that.
This will take you forward.
And maybe just as a reminder, this has all come up as we've gone through this, but just as a quick reminder to put a framework around what we're looking at here, you gotta, the types amount participating areas of services are largely determined by the board with input from your constituents. The cost of providing those services and funding requirements is done by staff. A natural component of that is determining how much the tax requisition amount is. However, the allocation between the different areas and property classes of that tax requisition amount is in the hands of the BC Assessment Authority by way of property assessments that they develop independently of the TNRD. These assessed values are impacted by both changes in market values, growth, and differentiation moves between classes of property. So there's a lot of sort of moving parts. Hopefully some of this, some of the graphs here will accommodate or explain some of that. So the chart that's up there now is showing the tax requisition distributions down to a total amount, and you can see actually Kamloops is picking up slightly less amount. Or pardon me, assessment. So their assessed value percentage participation for the what services that they participate in is actually declining year over year from 64 to 63%. You can see as you go through there, a couple of them have gone down. Clearwater has actually increased significantly, as has Logan Lake has gone down. Sun Peaks has increased significantly, and Area A has also increased significantly. The impacts of that will be seen in a little more detail as we roll into some other slides here. What did I do? Did I bury it?
No, just make sure I can, when you talk.
Okay. This table shows the tax amount, sorry, the increases. This is tax requisition amount changes in 2023 versus 2022 in the first sort of box of two columns there due to assessed property value changes. So this is on the presumption that there were no changes whatsoever to tax requisitions 2022 into 2023. Just based on the changes in the way the assets were going, Kamloops would be paying an extra $113,000 as compared to what they did the year before. And as you can see, I'm having trouble seeing those. Kamloops is up, Merritt and Logan Lake are down significantly, Chase is down. All in all, you get to the bottom of that and they'll add up to zero. Because that's the same tax requisition that was charged in 2022. It's just being allocated to different entities based on the changes and assessed values between the prior year and the current one. I stumbled a bit at the start of that one. Did I confuse everybody or do you have questions on that one? Okay. This is showing residential property taxes. So this is the amount attributable to your normal homeowners in the areas that are shown there. The average prices are calculated from external sources. The rate per thousand is generated out of our tax allocation information, and it shows an average price of taxes in each of those areas. And you can see that Kamloops Kamloops has declined, and that's as a result of assessment allocations. Not a lot of change in Barriere. As you go down through the lot, you can see how much those are dropping or increasing on a residential basis for an average home in that area.
I think that's a good look if you're trying to explain to your residents. We typically try and figure out what the average price is for a home in that area and what they would be paying for taxes, and then the difference that they would be paying year over year. So really at the end, that's what you're seeing for the resident.
I have seen analysis of this, and I don't know if you want to contemplate it going forward, where you look at these rates on a per $100,000 of value basis. And then if your house is worth $500,000, you just multiply it by 5, and it gives you an idea what your taxes are going to be and how much they're different from the year previous, that kind of thing.
I did put a handout out to you so that this could be a bit of a takeaway, because this is obviously a lot to swallow here on the screen. But what we really wanted to do for you that were really concerned about the impact of the increase is really give you a way that you could look at the city of Kamloops. There's one of these that Scott's created for each of your areas. So as he goes through here, obviously, we're not going to have time to go through everybody's area. He'll go through a couple of them, but we can send these out to whoever would like to see this in more detail.
And again, this is attempting to capture the impact of two different factors. You can see we got the 2022 total tax requisition as a starting basis on the left of the left column. In 2022, if the taxes had remained the same and the assessed values were changed as they have been from 2022 into 2023, that's the share of the taxes that would be picked up. And then the adjustment rate. I'm sorry, no, the participation rate. This is just showing actually the same data that we previously looked at, but based on the different services provided to the city of Kamloops. You can see as a result of that, the taxes dipped from 66.95 to 65.81. And then you make an adjustment for the actual service requisition increase, which brings it back up to 7.092. The bottom result is that there's a tax requisition increase for Kamloops of 5.9 cents, 5.9%. 7.6 of that is due to tax requisition increases, but it's offset by a drop 1.7% due to changes in property class or property tax allocations between the different participating areas.
So let
Yeah.
me make a comment there. So really what we want to show you is for Kamloops before budget, due to assessments, because of the assessment changes. This is where I said Kamloops kind of benefited that everybody else's assessments went up and they started taking bigger pieces of the pie. So even without the budget change based on 2022's budget, but the new assessment values, Kamloops would have paid a little bit less and everybody else starts paying a little bit more based on that. So you can see that a minus 1.7% based on that. Then we layer in the budget change and Kamloops overall impact to their requisition that they're paying is 5.9% based on those two factors. So just a way for you to look at how your area was impacted in those two different ways. So I'm not sure if, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and that 7.6% is not equal to the 5.6 that you've seen earlier. And again, that's because of the different services in which each of these areas is participating.
Okay, so I'm just wondering.
So as Carla mentioned, there is one of these pages set up for each of the service areas and the services for which they're paying. I don't know that there's value in going through them all right here. It'll take a fair amount of time. I've got a summary page that follows these. And these are all certainly available. I think they've been handed out
Yeah,
in the package. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So if there's any questions now on sort of what's happening in the background of this document, I'd be happy to answer them, or you can review yours individually and get back to Carla or me through Carla. So,
Okay. Oh, is there any questions on that?
Director Getz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, and maybe I should have asked this sooner. I'm assuming you're doing assessments on a perfect world, because right now in Merritt, we have 241 homes that are unlivable, and we have a lot of these people walking away from their taxes. You're simply not going to pay them. Did that come into any kind of consideration? I think Area N has some homes that are damaged as well. Does that come into any kind of consideration when you lose such a chunk of your, because of the flooding? Some of these homes will be reclaimed, others are going to be bought out, etc. So I'm assuming you're going on, and a lot of the, I was flooded, I was reassessed, I was revalued after the flood. And almost everybody that was in zone 3 and 4 were as well. So I'm just wondering what numbers you're going off here for. Are you going off of today's numbers or numbers pre-flood, I guess, for my area? It's just a question I'm wondering.
Yeah, and this, those assessed values for those properties is not determined by the TNRD. So the BC Assessment Authority develops those numbers. They will be based on what they thought those properties were worth in July of 2022. As we move forward, those changes will impact subsequent years if there's other changes to be made there, certainly.
Yeah, and I would say too, that if they came in and if BC Assessment has provided a reassessment for those, then they'll probably include those reassessments, but that would be determined by them. And when they come in, we're not 100% sure on that.
So if that's good, I'll just flip through a series of these which are in here, and they're all available in the handouts that you have now.
Would electoral area A actually be a good one?
Yeah.
Though you might have to go through the back button.
Which is
One lower. Hey, that one.
Yeah, sorry, Carla brings up a good point. Area A, and I'll have to get a paper version because I can't read that one. Well, I got it here.
Okay. Electoral area A is an interesting one.
Yeah, and this is where the utilities increase came in, resulting in them taking a much larger share of the assessment. And you can see, you get through all the different services they'll be providing there, but at the bottom of that sheet, you can see that the increase just due to assessment changes, 2023 versus 2022 is an increase of 10.9%. And then a tax requisition amounts actually offset that by 3% to get to the final tax requisition in that bottom right-hand corner, $640,000, giving you a total tax increase of 7.9% for the area. So it, I think, illustrates some of the things that are going on underneath, just with property changes in general, and the fact that a change between property class makeup will make some pretty significant differences. Okay, and actually another chance for any questions at this point. This is all available information too, so if you prefer to digest it a little further before asking questions, that's fine, but anything you got now we can deal with. Oh, what's one?
Just one question, and I'm just getting just a few things that jump out at me at times, so then I go and say, okay, I didn't know this. Is in a few we're showing tax requisition for transit. I'm looking at electoral area A. Does the TNRD actually provide a transit service up in that region? I didn't realize that that was a service that was offered.
Thanks, I could speak to that. So we have a partnership agreement and it's called the Valley Connector, that's the transit service. So the contract with BC Transit that operates that service and Electoral area A and B, as well as Barrier, Clearwater, I believe, pay into that service.
Not have that summary page, I guess.
All right, so as far as taking you through the budget document, making sure that you're aware of what's in there, what the impacts and changes are. I think we've got through a majority of what we were planning to do with that information. What I'd like to understand from the board right now is, are there any questions throughout the financial statements that you had prepared to ask us today to give you answers to? Because this is your opportunity. What we're going to do from today is, if there is any changes or things that you would like to see changed, we will incorporate that. What we would like to do is bring the final financial plan, I'm going to say draft 2 version, but hopefully a final version of that to the committee for discussion and review, and then bring that in February, and then bring the financial plan budget to the board in March for approval. We would like to have any direction from the board if you would like to see any changes from what we've brought you today, here today, so that we can make those changes. There will be an opportunity to work with the committee and make sure that we'd also like to meet with each of the electoral and municipality representatives that would like to meet with us to make sure that we can meet with them on their individual services, maybe go more in depth on the services that you have, so you understand, especially the new board members that haven't seen that before. They might want to take advantage of that opportunity to have some time with Jamie and I to go through in more detail your specific services, which we didn't today. So there will be that, there will be the committee opportunity, and then from there, we would bring you the final draft budget in March. And I've kind of outlined what we do here as far as finance. So yeah, just looking to see if there's any further questions in regards to numbers you're seeing in the budgets and any changes you'd like to see going forward.
Director Stamer has a question, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To staff, if we're going to have a 5-year financial plan bylaw in March, is there going to be an opportunity to have a strategic plan around that same time?
Sorry, Carla, I'll jump in on that one, but the strategic plan is scheduled for March 17th right now is the best we could do. So is that specifically your question, or do you want to?
Well, no, I'm just asking, is it going to be around the same time? Is that, it says bylaw to the board, is that going to be before or after the strategic plan?
I think it's after. I think the board meeting is March 30th is when it's done. So you'll have the strategic plan 2 weeks prior to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I know February 3rd, there's a intended meeting with the Finance Committee. What I'd like to know as a new board member is, what are the expectations of the Finance Committee with respect to this budget? Is the Finance Committee going to come back and make recommendations to the whole board, or how do you see that working, particularly given that there's been changes to the way committees get set up?
Corporate Officer Campbell.
Through the chair to Director Grenier. So at this first Finance Committee meeting, we'll go over what the mandate of that committee is. Reviewing the budget is just one of many things that the Finance Committee is responsible for. So our thinking was that if there's any input or feedback that the entire board sitting as committee of the whole has right now for Ms. Fox in terms of what she's presented, then she would take those changes. And if she gets additional feedback from one-on-one meetings that you may have with staff, she'll take those changes and do another presentation to the finance committee. And the finance committee will have an opportunity to provide additional input and feedback, which will go forward to the board. So if the finance committee does make any recommendations, those would have to be forwarded to the board. That makes sense? Great.
So just under 3 hours into this meeting, it's probably time that we had a motion on the floor, I'm thinking. So we do have a staff recommendation.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Smith. Director Getz seconds that. All right, so the motion is that the Committee of the Whole provide input and feedback on the draft 2023-2027 financial plan to be brought forward for consideration to the regular board meeting prior to the March 31st, 2023 deadline. As Corporate Officer Campbell just said, anyone who has suggestions here now at the Committee of the Whole, this is the time to raise them, or during one-on-one meetings or via email before it goes to the Finance Committee, which is the next step, she said, looking at the cheat sheet on the wall. So if anyone has any suggestions for changes, it's not quite speak now or forever hold your peace, but we're getting down there. And then as I said, and as has been reiterated, if you have any need or desire for a one-on-one meeting with staff to talk about your particular area, staff would be more than happy, she said confidently, to sit down and meet with you about that. So is there anything that anyone has to suggest for changes, additions, etc. at this point? Director Neustadter?
To the chair, thank you. Not necessarily to contribute right now or a question, but curious the best methodology for setting up those one-on-ones, or if you want to do that from a municipality to keep it simpler for you, fewer meetings, but how would you like us to go about booking those just for staff's ease?
Saying through the chair, we're going to send out actually an email just with a schedule that you could pick times to meet us. It should come out later today or beginning tomorrow.
All right, any other comments, additions, questions, changes? Thank you. Oh, you have a change? All right.
I do not have a change, but what I do welcome is, because this is the first time this type of presentation has come forward. If there was something that you would like to see differently or highlighted differently, I am completely open to feedback. I would love to hear any suggestions you might have if you think it would improve or change or otherwise. So I just wanted to put that out there, and thank you for letting me bring this different format forward.
And thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Thank you to staff for coming out here today and being here to answer questions. I'd like to echo what Director Laird said about this was an excellent presentation. I do not necessarily speak fluent finance or budget at all. And so this I found was a very straightforward way and relatively painless way to digest some very complex information. Thank you so much for taking the time and effort. And I don't think I saw any Excel spreadsheets in there. Yes, no. So thank you very much for that. And if there are no further comments, questions, changes, then I will call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. And with that, that is the final item on the agenda. So with that, we stand adjourned. It was so much fun. We'll do it all tomorrow.